Two men now effectively held power in Rome. Octavian, Caesar's 21-year-old legal heir, and Antony, Caesar's 40-year-old friend and general. Cleopatra was vulnerable in Egypt. She needed a protector, and Antony was her natural ally. He was the controller of the East, the dominant partner, and older, more popular, and demonstrably healthier than the sickly Octavian. Antony had enjoyed a well-documented dissolute youth of binge-drinking, promiscuous sex, and immoderate expenditure that left him heavily in debt. A distinguished military career and a growing reputation as a politician and orator followed, but the tendency to overindulge was never quite suppressed. Antony, now stationed in Tarsus, was busy raising funds. Cleopatra can hardly have been surprised when she was summoned to Tarsus to answer the charge that she had aided the traitor Cassius. Whatever the truth of the matter, this would be hard to disprove, and Antony, his eyes firmly fixed on Egypt's wealth, would need to be persuaded of her innocence. As always, Cleopatra hesitated, considering her options before settling on a tactic that would give her genius for showmanship full rein. If Antony was Dionysus, she would greet him as Isis, consort of Dionysus Osiris. She sailed along the Cydnus River to enter Tarsus in a gilded ship fitted with silver oars and a splendid purple silk sail. Flutes, pipes and lutes played on deck, and powerful incense perfumed the air. Cleopatra herself reclined beneath a gold-spangled canopy, dressed in the robes of Isis, attended by beautiful small boys dressed as cupids. The people flocked to the harbour to watch this spectacular arrival, leaving Antony alone and disconcerted in the marketplace. When he sent the Queen an invitation to dine, she declined, entertaining him instead with a splendid banquet, and they sat together that evening on the deck of her boat, amidst a multitude of twinkling artificial lights. Plutarch is quite clear that Cleopatra deliberately set out to seduce Antony, and that he, more naive than Caesar, almost immediately succumbed to her practised charms. She visited Antony at the very time when women have the most brilliant beauty and are at the acme of intellectual power. Therefore she provided herself with many gifts, much money, and such ornaments as high position and prosperous kingdom made it natural for her to take. But she went putting her greatest confidence in herself, and in the charms and sorceries of her own person. Cassius Dio says that Antony had earnestly devoted himself to his duties so long as he had been in a subordinate station and had been aiming at the highest prizes. But now that he had got into power, he no longer paid strict attention to any of these things, but joined Cleopatra and the Egyptians in general in their life of luxurious ease until he was entirely demoralized. It's important to see through this propaganda. Antony was not only a bluff, naive, simple fellow, he was also an extremely ambitious and capable man. Athenaeus recounts that first evening together. In a room decorated with purple and gold wall hangings, Cleopatra served delicious food on golden plates inlaid with precious stones. She ended the banquet by presenting all her golden plates to Antony. Cleopatra, it is suggested, habitually used the banquet as a means of seduction. She feasted with Caesar, a man so remarkably abstemious that he legislated against personal luxury, lavish food, and extravagant clothing. And now she feasted with Antony, a notoriously weak and lazy man. Indeed, if we take the accounts of the classical writers at face value, it seems that Cleopatra and Antony did nothing other than eat, drink, and fornicate. The sheer amount of food consumed and wasted at Cleopatra's court makes Plutarch shudder. Philotas, the physician, was in Alexandria, and having got well acquainted with one of the royal cooks, he was persuaded by him to take a view of the extravagant preparations for a royal supper. Accordingly, he was introduced into the kitchen, and when he saw all the other provisions in great abundance, and 8 wild boars a roasting, he expressed his amazement at what must be the number of guests. But the cook burst out laughing and said, "The guests are only about 12, but everything that is set before them must be at perfection, and this an instant of time reduces. Wherefore," he said, "not one, but many suppers are arranged, for the precise time is hard to hit." Cleopatra feasted with Antony, but she bargained with him too. She would part-finance Antony's Parthian campaign, but he, in return, must agree to protect her crown and her land. This protection included the removal of the sister who posed a constant threat. Dragged from her sanctuary, Arsinoe was murdered on Antony's order. Antony spent the winter of 41 to 40 BC relaxing in Alexandria. He enjoyed all the popularity that Caesar had lacked, appearing as a private individual, happy to abandon his Roman toga for a Greek cloak. Cleopatra and Antony formed a drinking society, the Inimitable Livers, which met every night to drink, feast, dice, hunt, and, a particular favourite, wander the streets of Alexandria in disguise, playing tricks on the hapless citizens. Antony was a famous joker. He jested with his men and roared with laughter when they in turn played tricks on him. Plutarch says Cleopatra had quickly recognized in the jests of Antony much of the soldier and the common man, and adopted this manner also towards him, without restraint now, and boldly. In 40 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to twins whom she named Alexander and Cleopatra. Antony had already left Alexandria and made no effort to see either Cleopatra or his Egyptian children for 3.5 years, although it seems that he did employ spies to keep him up to date with events in Egypt. This lengthy split suggests that Antony considered the months spent with Cleopatra as little more than a brief holiday from ordinary life. Cleopatra, who had used Antony to help her fulfill her duty to produce more children, may well have felt the same way. When Antony's wife died in 40 BC, he made a diplomatic marriage with Octavian's sister Octavia, and their wedding was celebrated just weeks after the birth of Antony's Egyptian twins. In 37 BC, they agreed to renew the triumvirate for a further 5 years. In addition, an exchange of troops and ships was agreed. Antony handed over his 120 ships, but did not receive Octavian's promised troops. He travelled to Antioch and summoned his military ally and financial backer Cleopatra, or, as Plutarch puts it, the dire evil which had been slumbering for a long time, namely his passion for Cleopatra, which men thought had been lulled to rest by better considerations, blazed up again with renewed power as he drew near to Syria. And finally, like the stubborn and unmanageable beast of the soul of which Plato speaks, he spurned away all noble counsel and sent for Cleopatra. Cleopatra spent the winter of 37 to 36 BC locked in negotiations with Antony. She could provide the fleet and provisions that Antony needed, but in exchange she asked for the return of the lost Eastern Empire of Ptolemy II. Antony agreed, not necessarily because he had been driven mad by his infatuation with Cleopatra, but because he needed her help, and in his view the return of the lands was fully in line with Roman policy, which was happy to allow a certain amount of autonomous government by trusted client monarchs. The propaganda Octavian was later able to make out of Antony's donation of whole provinces to Cleopatra without consulting the Senate suggests that not everyone agreed. Once again, Cleopatra and Antony were lovers. Whether this was a part of the bargain, or whether there was a genuine passion on both sides, is impossible to determine. The following year, Cleopatra was to bear a second son, Ptolemy Philadelphus. Returning from Antioch in triumph, Cleopatra proclaimed a new era, and Phoenician coins now show an obverse portrait of Cleopatra with a reverse portrait of Antony. Octavia, meanwhile, had been living the virtuous life of a Roman matron, caring for her own and Antony's various children. In 35 BC, she left Rome to bring troops and ships from Octavian to Antony, plus a contribution from her own purse. Disconcerted, Antony ordered Octavian not to come, but to send the soldiers on. Plutarch blames Cleopatra for this public rejection of Octavia. Cleopatra perceived that Octavia was coming into a contest at close quarters with her, and feared she would become invincible and get complete control over her husband. She therefore pretended to be passionately in love with Antony herself, and reduced her body by slender diet. She put on a look of rapture when Antony drew near, and one of faintness and melancholy when he went away. Her flatterers, too, were industrious in her behalf, and used to revile Antony as hard-hearted and unfeeling. For Octavia, they said, had married him as a matter of public policy and for the sake of her brother, and enjoyed the name of wedded wife. But Cleopatra, who was queen of so many people, was called Antony's beloved, and she did not shun this name nor disdain it, as long as she could see him and live with him. But if she were driven away from him, she would not survive it. It is more likely that with his relationship with Octavian fast breaking down, Antony's political marriage had become an irrelevance. He had decided that the way ahead lay with Cleopatra. This was not the first time that Antony had discarded a no longer useful wife. But his rejection of the virtuous Octavia in favour of an illicit alliance with a foreigner did not go down well in Rome. In 34 BC, Antony entered Alexandria dressed in the golden robe of Dionysus. Before his chariot walked the captured king of Armenia and his family, festooned with either silver or golden chains. Octavian, watching from Rome, was not amused. This too closely resembled a triumph, a strictly Roman sacred celebration. Antony, it seemed, considered Alexandria a capital to rival Rome. For the first time, Octavian started to criticize Antony in public. A private letter from Antony to Octavian survives in Suetonius. "What has come over you? Do you object to me sleeping with Cleopatra? But we are married, and it's not even as if this is anything new. The affair started 9 years ago. And what about you? Are you faithful to Drusilla? My congratulations if when this letter arrived you've not been to bed with Tertulia or Terentilla or Rufilla or Salvia Titisania, all of them. Does it really matter so much where or with whom you perform the sexual act?" The Romans, who looked long and hard at Cleopatra, never saw a wife. They saw an unnatural, immodest woman who preyed on other women's husbands. From this developed the myth of the sexually promiscuous Cleopatra, and claims of torrid affairs with countless men. A harsh legacy indeed for a woman who probably had no more than 2 consecutive sexual relationships.